The purpose of the video that you're about to see is to show you in an academic environment what a Socratic seminar actually looks like. The Socratic seminar process is one as old as the time of Socrates, but the National Paideia Center has some very interesting ideas on how to implement Socratic seminars in your own school. Phase 1 of the Socratic seminar process requires first that students learn the skill of conversation. They must first learn how to write literal questions, then they learn to write interpretive questions, and ultimately learn to write evaluative questions. So the purpose of a Socratic seminar is to achieve a deeper, richer understanding of a text. As you will see these students in their discussion, they have clearly learned the art and the science of conversation. They have done so by understanding how to ask proper questions. You will also observe that their classmates are around them looking at and coaching them on a variety of skills. Each of the students on the outside of the circle has a Socratic seminar discussion evaluation form. Each student is giving feedback to someone in the center of the circle. The feedback is designed to increase their skills and their fluency as students involved in a Socratic seminar. The key elements of a good Socratic seminar first is a rich text, a text that the students have read fully and understand and can comprehend. The next thing that happens is that literal questions have to be understood and asked, and students do that external to the actual Socratic seminar. The second component is a positive classroom environment where students can both receive the kind of assistance they need and give the kind of feedback that others need to grow. And lastly, the third component is a good classroom series of questions. Like the Harkis model, the students in the Socratic model have an opportunity to give each other feedback and to grow from the feedback. Now, when you see this video, I hope you will have an opportunity to understand that the higher order thinking skills that occur here come with the fluency of knowing how to move through Bloom's taxonomy and with the ease of understanding how Williams' taxonomy actually works in a good Socratic seminar.
Do you think that we need government more in today's society or Henry's?
I think we definitely need government more in today's society because I think the meaning of government has kind of changed from Thoreau's time, and we feel like we have more freedom, and we do have more freedom, but I think the reasons for our freedom is a lot different than it was back then.
Yeah, and back in today we have more crime and more crime, so we need more government to kind of watch over us because we're more irresponsible than back then.
Yeah, I think that now we have more of an attitude of what we want to do than they did back then. So, yeah, I think we need it more today than then.
I would say yes, we do need government, as you all can see, but not a government that controls people and their actions. We do need government, yes, government for protection. We need, government to feed the homeless or things like that, even though that's not their primary job, but that's what they're doing. I think we do need that today, yes.
I think I'd have to disagree with you guys because we're dealing with a lot of problems nowadays with the economy and overseas issues, but we're kind of volunteering to deal with those issues. When back then we had things like the Civil War going on where our country was falling apart. So I think that the government kind of kept us together in that sense from falling apart
So,
with the slaves and all that.
so do you support government or not?
Well, the question was, do we need government more then or now? And I think that we needed it more then.
But also going back to what you said, back then our government was a lot different than it is now.
Yeah.
It's much it's not more modern, but we have more people, more opinions. We have different crises that we need to deal with too.
It was much more simpler back then.
And
Now
I
it's
think
all
that
complex.
as time has progressed, we've come up with more ways to get around certain rules, and we've come up with more just more ways of defying rules and regulations So I think that now we need more rules and regulations for people who just try to like not do black or white, just trying to go in the gray section where they think that, oh, this is okay.
Well, when you said that things were simpler back then, I don't necessarily think they were simpler. It was still a very hard time. The technology might not has been as advanced. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a simpler time. It just means there was less technology in that sense, but it was not simpler. I mean, they still had a lot of things going on, stuff they needed to do in the government. There were still a lot of laws. There might have not have been as many laws now, but there still were laws and regulations they had to follow back then.
Well,
Ye-
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
You.
Well, yeah, but back then they kind of followed the basic, the Constitution, and now they don't really follow it. So they kind of make their own laws. So it was, to say, a bit more simpler than it is now.
How does Thoreau's views politically reflect on him as a transcendentalist?
I think that like transcendentalism is like all nature and all like God-given things, and I think that government isn't necessarily God-given. I think that like man has developed it, and it's kind of obvious that Henry Thoreau like doesn't really agree with God or man-made things because like he got away from man and society. So I think that he doesn't like it because like man has taken such control over it.
So you think that it agrees with him, his views as a transcendentalist, his views politically, or they don't?
I think that he definitely doesn't contradict himself like that. So yeah, I do think that it kind of lines up with his beliefs.
Yeah, I agree with Jess because in the other chapters before civil disobedience, he was more drawn to nature-like things than stuff that man had made or stuff that wasn't naturally there in the first place. So,
I would say it definitely agrees with his views as a transcendentalist because in the book he talks about how he goes and gets away from life and kind of just lives on his own and handles himself and no one really rules over him. That's how he likes it. And his views politically are no government. We govern ourselves and kind of just handle ourselves. And that's what he does in the book.
Well, let me just bring up a point. I'm kind of thinking, like, I understand that Thoreau doesn't like government, but maybe he's saying that government shouldn't be controlling other people. I mean, not saying that government, like, totally no government, because we need some kind of leadership or something. But I think what Thoreau is trying to say is we don't need a government that controls people, taking over their lives. We need a government that protects the nation like it was designed to. We need a government that takes care of people who need it. We don't need a government that goes in and just, completely obliterates and controls everything. What do you guys think about
Yeah, I
that?
agree with that. We need a government that gives us enough freedom so we feel that we're not being controlled, but we still need a government to watch over us because some Americans are irresponsible and stuff.
I mean, the order is there. I'm not. I don't think he's saying to like completely scrap government, but he's just saying to have a government that doesn't control the people. That's not just like, do this, do that.
what was Henry's main act of civil disobedience, and was it easier to rebel then compared to now?
Of course, it was easy to rebel. I mean, you don't have the IRS on your back, I don't think.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, yeah, I think it was much easier to rebel back then than now, obviously. He was just thrown in jail for a day, and, his
Yeah.
family came and got him out. But today, it would be far worse.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'd be any easier to rebel then than now, but it would probably be easier to get people to rebel with you because nowadays if some person stands up for what they believe, they have like it going on the news and everybody hearing about it, and then it starts more people rebelling, and it just keeps progressing like that. So
They rebel if they agree, though.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So it might not be just as bad repercussions as it is then, but it probably would be easier for him to get other people to join him in the rebel.
Do you think you would rebel like he did today? Like, do you think you would stand up for what you believed and go to jail?
If I did, it would definitely be a lot harder. Like, say I'm rebelling for my faith. It's definitely a lot harder now than it is back then. Like, back then, you expect to see everyone in church, all the time. Now, like, in the public school, you can't talk about God or anything. So if you're rebelling for your faith, it's definitely a lot harder to get other people to rebel with you, because when you're rebelling by yourself, it's like you feel like you're the only one that believes in it.
Yeah, you're kind of
But you know you're not, but it's still intimidating. And back then, like, if you were rebelling for something he was, you knew that there were other people on your side, even if they weren't rebelling with you. So I think now, if I did, it would be much harder than it was back then.
You have to really think strongly.
You have to really think it through.
Yeah, I think today would be more like mentally hard to like disagree with the government, and because back then you physically would know that someone was with you, or know someone that went to church with you, or you would know that they were there and that they also would agree with you. But today, like, mentally, you don't even know if like half the people at your church are going because they have nothing better to do, or because they actually believe. Like, I think that it would be more mentally hard today than it would back then.
Well, I think there's easier and it's harder now, because it's harder because you would get attached to technology easier and you don't want to get away from it. But in jail now, there's so much more things to do. Back then, it was just like this little room that you'd sit in all day, but now they have like TV and they have recreation that they get to do.
Okay.
In what ways nowadays can we defy government like Walden did back then?
You can protest.
Yeah, I think that like protesting and like having like conferences. I know that like a lot of the like gay community, they have like little like, I don't know what it's called, like little, I guess they're not like riots, but they're little like meetings like publicly to try and get their like city to pass certain laws. So I guess that's one of them.
Yeah, we can protest, but it can't be like out of control, rioting the streets, tearing down buildings, stuff like that. But if we peacefully protest and
Nonviolent.
like Martin Luther, I believe, protest, he was a good protester and stuff like that, and we're not violent about it, then I think we can get away with that.
And I feel like if you do want to protest, it's much more heard of today than it was back then. Like, in the news, you hear all the time people protesting about this, like people taking a stand about whatever they believe in. And if you do that, at first people will look at you like, why are you doing that? But then after a while, it gets easier to get people to believe. And it's it's easier to state your opinion and like give the reason why you think you're right against
And
someone
just-
else too.
And just like way back then with the civil rights movement, a lot of people protested during that time to have their full rights. So, for just a quick minute, I want to go to lawmaking in the government. I'm just real curious to see, do you all think that the government should consult the American people about the laws that they make, or should they go on ahead and just make the laws according to whatever research they come upon, or
I think
Or
they
what?
should definitely consult the people, because it's the
for,
laws.
for every law though? Sorry, I didn't. put that in.
Yeah,
For every
I
law.
think for every law. Well, depending on the law, because most laws are affecting the people. So
That's
I
true.
think the people should have a right to say and give their opinions on that law, because it's affecting them most of the time. It depends on the
Big
law.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think they should consult the people and get their opinions and go from there on the laws.
I think they should consult the people, but depending on how important the law is going to be. and how many people they think will get to agree with it. Because, I mean, like little laws are made every day, and people don't want to hear about laws that don't like that they are not involved in or doesn't affect them. So I think that the ones that are more likely to be passed or the people are to side with should be.
I think they should consult people about everything, going off of what Kayla said, because some laws affect the poor people, some laws affect the rich people, most laws affect the middle class. And, like, if it's a major law, like a tax law, and you look at your paycheck and you're like, where is the rest of my money at? And you don't know that there is a tax law, like, obviously they should consult you about it
Right.
because it affects every different kind of people. You can't just think about, oh, it's not going to affect me, they don't have to tell me. Well, what about the people below you? What about the people above you?
I think it's a good idea to consult people, but I don't really see how that would work, because if we had government consulting us on every law they wanted to pass, I think that people's opinions would differ, and it's kind of obvious that people in America don't really get along. Like, we have two totally different opinions on everything. I mean, I think it's a good idea, but I can see why we don't do it, because people would disagree. Then there'd be another argument about like a regular everyday law. So I think
We'll
it's
just keep going on and on.
yeah,
I
it would
see.
just never work.
Continuing on the laws, Thoreau actually puts a question in here about laws. He says, it's on page 272 at the bottom, and he says, unjust laws exist. Shall we be content to obey them, or shall we endeavor to amend them and obey them until we have succeeded, or shall we transgress them at once? What do you guys think about that?
I think it's really true. And like the first three words, unjust laws exist, like everyone knows that, and even back then it still was true. So I think that that whole question like is really true, and it's really a good question.
So should we, for unjust laws, should we succeed or endeavor to amend them?
I think just sometimes you just have to be content to obey unjust laws, because, I mean, if you choose not to obey them, there's really nothing that you can do. So I think it really depends on the law and how it affects you. But I think on certain, like, trivial things, we just have to accept it.
I think because government, they're not just going to pass a law just to pass a law. There's always a reason to pass a law. And if you don't agree with it, well, look at another person's point of view. Like, they might agree with it because it might help them in their situation. But I think we should obey it, because either you obey the law or you go to jail. Like, that's just the way it is.
A quote from page 279 says, if a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies, and so a man. What are your opinions on that quote?
I think what he means, like, if a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies. Like, so I'm going to talk about the plant. So if the plant doesn't get the water that it needs, then it's obviously not going to live for very long. If we don't have the government that we need, because we don't always know what's right for us. Sometimes you need other people to tell you, hey, like, this is wrong. Like, you can't go out and kill somebody and think you're in the right. Like, you're obviously not. And so I think when he says, and so a man, he's also talking about, like, we do need government, and we do need people to tell you this is right and this is wrong. You don't need, like, total domination from one person, but you do need someone to tell you, just like a parent would tell their child, like, hey, you need to do this, or you need to not do this.
That's a good point. Just like with, who said, give me liberty, give me death again?
Patrick Henry.
Patrick Henry. He said, give me liberty or give me death, because either you're going to give me my freedom and what I want to do, or you're not. So I think that relates really well with this, because it says if a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies. Well, just like with him, he said, if I can't do it, I go ahead and kill me. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I really like that quote. At first, I was like, what is a plant doing in civil disobedience? But then, like, if you dig deeper, I think it's a really good metaphor for what we're talking about.
And I think he wants us to like realize that we need to like slow down sometimes and just take a breath and just look at what you're doing. Because sometimes, like I know all of us now are on the go all the time, no matter what. You either have sports, you have school, you have your job, and especially like due to the advance of the technology that we have, it's very helpful. And that's just the pace that we go by in life. And he obviously didn't like that because he was a transcendentalist. And so he just wants us to just step back and like evaluate what we're doing in our life and see like maybe, hey, I don't need this new iPad. So maybe, sorry, Isaac,
No, you're fine.
but maybe like instead of spending this money on this, maybe I can get food or something.